The air in the wardroom of Naval Forward Operating Base Thule was thick with the ghosts of 1,000 stale cigars and the lingering scent of fried fish from the midday meal. It was a place built for function, not comfort. A steel box dropped onto a godforsaken shard of rock in the North Atlantic, perpetually assaulted by wind and sea. The fluorescent lights hummed a low, monotonous drone, a sound that seeped into the bones and became the baseline rhythm of existence for the men and women stationed there. Outside, the wind was beginning to keen, a prelude to the symphony of destruction the forecast had promised. It was a sound that made the old hands pour their coffee with a little less splash and the new ones glance nervously at the vibrating bulkhead panels. It was a place where confidence was currency, and arrogance was often mistaken for it. In the corner, away from the boisterous cluster of off-duty engineers and comms technicians gathered around the holovid screen, a woman sat alone. She was a study in anonymity. Her hair was a nondescript brown, pulled back in a simple, severe knot. Her coveralls were standard issue, devoid of any rank insignia or unit patches that might betray a story. She could have been a civilian contractor, a logistics specialist, perhaps a meteorologist sent to observe the coming tempest. She was of average height, with a build that suggested economy rather than strength, and a face that was plain but placid, a canvas cleared of all emotion. She nursed a single mug of black coffee, her hands wrapped around it for a warmth that the room's overworked heaters could not provide. She did not read a datapad or engage with the noise. She simply sat, watching, listening, her stillness a stark contrast to the restless energy of the room. Her name was Evelyn Reed, but in that room, she had no name. She was a ghost before the storm. Brigadier General Marcus Thorne was the opposite of a ghost. He was a creature of pure, thunderous presence. A Marine general on a liaison tour to inspect joint operational readiness, he moved through the naval base as if he owned it, his barrel chest puffed out, his face a granite testament to 3 decades of shouting down lesser men. His face looked like it had been carved from naval tradition itself, all sharp angles and weathered resolve, but his eyes held the restless, hungry look of a man who measured his own worth by the deference of others. He was laughing now, a loud, booming sound that sliced through the low hum of the wardroom, slapping a young Navy lieutenant on the back with enough force to make him spill his drink. Authority did not radiate from General Thorne like heat from a furnace. It was projected, a relentless broadcast of his own importance that demanded acknowledgement from every soul in his vicinity. He was the storm inside, a localized tempest of ego and unearned certainty. Thorne's sweeping gaze, a proprietary inventory of his temporary domain, eventually fell upon the still figure in the corner. He saw a woman, small and plain, occupying space without contributing to the masculine camaraderie he was cultivating. He saw a civilian, or worse, some low-level administrative officer who had wandered out of her designated box. In his world, a world of rigid hierarchies and loud proclamations of strength, her silence was not a sign of discipline, but a vacuum. And Marcus Thorne abhorred a vacuum. He saw a nail that was not hammered down, and he, as always, was the hammer. He strode over, his polished boots clicking with aggressive precision on the worn linoleum floor. The cluster of junior officers around him fell silent, turning to watch the impending spectacle. It was a familiar ritual. The general would find a target, a perceived weak link, and use them as a teaching tool, a piece of whetstone upon which to sharpen his own authority for all to see. He stopped before her table, casting a long shadow that swallowed her whole. She did not look up immediately, instead taking a slow, deliberate sip of her coffee. Only then did she raise her eyes, and they were as calm and gray as the sea before the storm breaks. There was no fear in them, no deference. There was nothing at all, and that, more than anything, stoked the furnace of his indignation. "You lost, little lady?" His voice was a condescending rumble, designed to be overheard. It was a performance for the audience he had brought with him. This is a forward operating area, not a social club. Some of us are preparing for a serious weather event. Reed placed her mug down on the table with a soft, deliberate click. She did not flinch. She did not turn. Her gaze remained fixed on his, a passive instrument of observation. "I am aware of the weather, General," she said. Her voice was low, calm, and utterly devoid of inflection. It was a voice that stated facts, not one that engaged in social games. The simplicity of her response, the lack of the expected stammering or the deferential "sir," was a splash of cold water. It infuriated him. He had expected her to shrink, to apologize for her existence. Her placid self-possession was a challenge, an act of silent rebellion. He leaned forward, placing his thick, meaty hands on her small table, his knuckles white. The metal table groaned under his weight. He was invading her personal space, a classic tactic of physical intimidation. "You're aware?" he mocked, his voice dripping with theatrical disbelief. "That's nice, but awareness and preparedness are two very different things. In my world, in the real world of consequence, people who don't understand that distinction get others killed. People who don't know their place, who sit quietly in a corner when they should be contributing or getting out of the way, are a liability." He looked over his shoulder at the assembled junior officers. "Lesson 1, gentlemen. Identify your liabilities. Before the crisis, not during." The young men nodded, their faces a mixture of sycophantic agreement and genuine discomfort. They could feel the cruelty in the air, the unnecessary nature of this public dressing down. But he was a general and they were not, so they stood and watched the lion torment the mouse. Reed's eyes flickered for a moment, not with fear, but with something else. It was a subtle shift, a momentary sharpening of focus, like a lens adjusting to capture a clearer image. It was the look of a scientist observing an interesting but predictable chemical reaction. "My presence here is not a liability, General," she stated, again with that unnerving calm. It was not a defense. It was a correction of a factual error. Her refusal to be baited, to show any crack in her serene facade, pushed Thorne past the point of professional condescension and into the realm of personal animosity. He saw her composure not as discipline, but as insolence. He saw a woman who needed to be taught a lesson, who needed to be broken for the good of the institution, for the good of the natural order of things as he understood them. "Is that so?" he snarled, his face now inches from hers. The smell of stale coffee and self-righteous fury washed over her. "In my corps, when someone's competence is in question, we don't debate it with words. We prove it with action. We put them to the test. A test so severe that failure results in a kind of professional death. You are removed. You are forgotten. Your career ceases to exist. We fight for our place, for our credibility, until one person is left standing. Are you prepared for that kind of test? To fight for your right to occupy that chair?" He was not challenging her to a physical duel, not literally. He was challenging her very being, her right to exist in his world. He was declaring a war of legitimacy, and in his mind he had already won. He was a brigadier general of the United States Marine Corps. She was nothing, a blank slate, a ghost. He was offering her a chance to surrender before the slaughter. She did not answer immediately. The entire wardroom was now silent, save for the hum of the lights and the rising howl of the wind outside. The holovid had been muted. Every eye was on the small woman in the corner, pinned by the physical and hierarchical weight of the general. She seemed to be considering his words, not as a threat, but as a philosophical proposition. Then, she gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "I understand the concept of a stress test, General," she said, her voice still a monotone. "And the consequences of failure." Before Thorne could deliver what he intended to be the final, crushing blow to her insolence, the world dissolved into noise and violence. A sound like the sky cracking open erupted, a deafening shriek of tortured metal that transcended hearing and became a physical blow. The entire base shuddered, a deep, violent tremor that threw men from their feet. The lights flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging the wardroom into an abyss of absolute blackness. Red emergency lights stuttered to life a second later, casting the room in a hellish, pulsing crimson glow. Through the reinforced storm shutters, a new sound could be heard over the wind, a grinding, percussive roar, like mountains being pulverized into sand. Panic, raw and primal, ignited in the darkness. Men shouted, disoriented. Someone screamed as a heavy storage locker, shaken loose from its moorings, crashed to the deck. General Thorne reacted on instinct. "Everyone, stay calm," he bellowed, his voice a familiar instrument of command. "Damage control, report. Comms? Get me a sitrep from the pier. Move." His orders were textbook. They were what a commander was supposed to say. But they were useless. They were just noise added to the chaos. The men he was shouting at were junior officers in a wardroom, not a command center team. They had no stations, no immediate duties. His commands created confusion, not order. He was a general of infantry, a master of land warfare. Here, on this rock in the middle of the ocean, he was a tourist, and his tools were useless against the wrath of the sea. A young ensign, his face pale with terror in the strobing red light, managed to get a handheld comm unit working. "Command, this is Wardroom. What's the situation?" "Over." The reply was a garbled mess of static and a single, terrified voice shouting. "Pier is gone. Mooring bollard 7 sheared clean off. The stalwart is breaking up. She's going to swing into the fuel depot. Oh God. We're..." The transmission ended in a burst of static. The stalwart, a submarine tender, a massive, floating industrial complex, currently holding 2 hunter-killer submarines alongside for refitting. And it was about to pivot on its remaining lines and smash into the base's primary fuel storage facility. It was a doomsday scenario, a chain reaction that would obliterate the entire installation and everyone on it. Thorne understood the implication instantly. His face, which had been a mask of righteous fury moments before, was now slack with dawning horror. He grabbed the comm from the ensign. "This is General Thorne. Who is in command at the pier? Get me your damage control chief. We need to sever the remaining lines and let her drift." "That's an order." It was a catastrophic miscalculation. Severing the lines would indeed prevent the ship from hitting the fuel depot, but it would send a 200,000-ton vessel, with 2 nuclear submarines tethered to it, into a hurricane-force storm in the North Atlantic. It was a death sentence for the ship and its crew. It was the panicked, simple solution of a man who saw a problem and wanted it gone, without understanding the infinitely more complex second and third-order effects. From the darkness, a voice cut through his panicked shouting. It was calm. It was clinical. It was absolute. "Negative, General. That is the wrong call." In the strobing red gloom, the woman, Evelyn Reed, was now on her feet. The chaos that had sent everyone else staggering had not seemed to touch her. She had risen from her chair with a fluid, economical grace, as if she were merely getting up to fetch another cup of coffee. She had moved from the corner of the room to the main communications console against the far wall, a place no one had even thought to go. Her movements were not rushed. They were imbued with a terrifying purpose. She was no longer a still, placid observer. She was a weapon that had just been unsheathed. She deftly keyed the console, her fingers dancing across the controls with a familiarity that was both shocking and hypnotic. The main Holovid screen, which had been showing a sports game moments before, flickered to life, displaying a chaotic scene from an external camera on the pier. A maelstrom of black water, driving rain, and the groaning, tilting deck of the massive submarine tender. "This is Reed," she said into the console's comm, her voice slicing through the static with impossible clarity. "All hands, listen up. Acknowledge." A chorus of panicked, uncertain voices came back through the speaker. "Pier control. Engineering, we copy. Damage control central. Standing by." Thorne stared, his mouth agape. Who was this woman? How did she know the comms protocols? How had she activated the command override on the main console? He started to move toward her, to reassert his authority, to stop this madness. "Who the hell do you think you are? I am in command here." She did not even turn to look at him. She held up one hand, a simple, dismissive gesture that stopped him in his tracks more effectively than a drawn weapon. It was a gesture of such profound and innate authority that it defied his rank, his size, his entire being. It was the gesture of a lioness allowing a jackal to dance at the edge of its kill radius, knowing it was of no consequence. "General," she said, her voice dropping a register, taking on a tone of chilled steel that made the hairs on his arms stand up. "You are a guest at this facility. You are not qualified to handle a Class 4 maritime structural failure event. You will stand down, you will remain silent, and you will observe, or I will have you removed. Do you understand me?" The sheer, unadulterated audacity of her words stunned the room into a new kind of silence. Awe was replacing panic. The junior officers stared, their minds struggling to process what they were witnessing. A nameless, rankless woman had just threatened to have a Marine general physically removed from a command center during a crisis. And the most terrifying part was that she sounded like she had every right and ability to do so. Her attention was already back on the crisis. Her voice became a foreign language of expertise, a torrent of technical jargon and strategic imperatives that left everyone else behind. "Engineering, I need a pressure reading on hydraulic actuators for mooring winches 3, 4, and 6. Give me a real-time strain gauge telemetry feed. Now! Peer control, I need 2 teams. Team Alpha, you will prep shape charges for a controlled severance of mooring line 2. Do not arm them until I give the word. The detonation sequence must be precise. Team Bravo, you will man the emergency capstans on the leeward side. We are going to use the storm's energy to swing her stern, not fight it. Damage control, what is the status of the primary ballast pumps on the stalwart? I need them to flood portside tanks 7 and 9 to 80% capacity. We're going to induce a controlled list to alter her center of gravity and reduce the shear stress on bollard 4-inch. The orders were complex, counterintuitive, and brilliant. She was not just reacting to the crisis. She was orchestrating it, bending the catastrophic forces of the storm to her will. She saw the entire event not as a single disaster, but as a complex physics problem, a multivariable equation she was solving in real time. The panicked voices on the comms began to change. The fear was replaced by focus. The uncertainty was replaced by the crisp, professional acknowledgments of sailors who recognized they were in the presence of a master. They did not know who she was, but they recognized the voice of true command, of unassailable competence. For the next 20 minutes, the wardroom, which had been a scene of chaos, became a silent theater of operations. The only sound was Reed's calm, steady voice, and the crackle of responses from the teams fighting for their lives in the tempest outside. She stood before the glowing screen, a conductor leading an orchestra through a hurricane. She processed dozens of streams of data, issued hundreds of precise commands, her mind a supercomputer of naval engineering and crisis management. She anticipated points of failure seconds before they happened, rerouted power to failing systems, and coordinated the actions of 100 sailors with the grace of a choreographer. General Thorne stood frozen, a statue of obsolete authority. He was watching a level of operational genius he had never before witnessed. His world, built on the simple foundations of discipline, firepower, and aggression, had crumbled. He was a child watching a grandmaster play three-dimensional chess. The words she used, isobaric drift, torsional load, polycrystalline fracture, were from a lexicon he did not possess. He had tried to solve a problem by smashing it with a hammer, and she was performing microsurgery on it with a laser. The humiliation was so profound, so complete, that it transcended anger and settled deep in his soul as a cold, hard knot of pure incomprehension. The image on the screen showed the massive tender, groaning and heaving, begin a slow, deliberate pivot away from the fuel depot. The controlled list she had ordered had worked, shifting the immense forces acting on the hull. The emergency capstans were turning, using the wind itself to guide the behemoth into a more stable alignment. The crisis was not over, but the immediate threat of annihilation had passed. She had stared into the abyss and forced it to blink. It was then that a new voice cut in over the command channel, this one clearer, amplified by the priority signal of a satellite uplink. It was a voice that radiated a calm, weary authority that had been earned over a lifetime of command at sea. "Thule Command, this is Admiral Harrison, Compsablant. We've been monitoring the telemetry burst. What in God's name is happening down there? Before anyone could respond, before the local base commander could even stammer out a reply, Reed spoke into her mic, her voice unchanged. Admiral, this is Daedalus. We had a catastrophic mooring failure during the initial storm surge. The situation is stabilizing. I estimate we can fully secure the stalwart within 30 minutes. The name descended into the room like a physical object. Daedalus. It was a call sign, a whisper in the intelligence community, a legend in the shadowy world of naval special warfare and experimental engineering. Daedalus was not a person. It was a ghost, a mythical troubleshooter who was only activated when a situation was so dire, so technically complex, that conventional solutions had already failed. Daedalus was the Navy's ultimate ace in the hole, a figure spoken of in the same hushed, reverent tones as the designers of the first nuclear submarines. There was a moment of silence on the comm line. Then Admiral Harrison's voice came back, and all the weariness was gone, replaced by an audible wave of profound relief. Daedalus, thank God. I should have known. The situation is yours, Commander. Full operational authority is yours. Whatever you need, you get it. The entire Atlantic Fleet is at your disposal. Harrison out. Commander. The word hung in the air, an indictment and a revelation. General Thorne staggered back a step, his face ashen. He felt the floor drop out from beneath him. Commander, not a civilian, not a logistics clerk, a commander in the United States Navy. And not just any commander. She was Daedalus. He felt a wave of nausea. He hadn't just been condescending to a fellow officer. He had publicly humiliated a living legend, a figure whose clearance level and operational history probably made his own career look like a footnote in a forgotten manual. The base's actual commander, a portly captain who had been struggling to get a handle on the situation from the primary command center, finally arrived in the wardroom, his face slick with sweat. He saw the woman at the console, saw the general standing frozen in shock, and saw the Admiral's priority link icon on the screen. He pieced it together in a flash. "Attention on deck!" the captain bellowed, his voice cracking with stress and awe. The junior officers, who had been mesmerized by the unfolding drama, snapped to attention. It was a gesture of pure, reflexive military discipline. General Thorne, his mind reeling, his entire worldview shattered, slowly, mechanically, brought his heels together. He raised his hand in a salute, the motion stiff and unfamiliar. He was saluting the small, plain woman in the nondescript coveralls. He was saluting Commander Evelyn Reed. He was saluting Daedalus. She did not turn. She did not acknowledge the salute or the call to attention. She was still working, her focus absolute. She was saving his base, saving his life, and she did not have time for the petty rituals of rank and ego that had started this entire disaster. Her complete indifference to the gesture was the final, most devastating blow. He was not even significant enough to be acknowledged. He was simply part of the background noise she had filtered out. 30 minutes later, the stalwart was secure. 2 of its main mooring lines had been replaced with emergency high-tensile cables, and the ship was stable, riding out the worst of the storm. The immediate danger was over. Commander Reed issued a final series of orders, delegating the cleanup and post-event monitoring to the base's engineering chief. Then she turned from the console, her work done. The wardroom was still silent. The emergency lights still pulsed their rhythmic crimson beat. She walked slowly, deliberately, back to her table. Her coffee was still there, cold now. She picked it up and looked directly at General Thorne. For the first time, her face held an expression. It was not anger. It was not triumph. It was the detached, clinical curiosity of a surgeon examining a tumor she had just excised. "General," she said, her voice once again quiet, stripped of the iron command it had held. "Your performance earlier was a case study in catastrophic leadership failure. Your primary motivation was not operational readiness, but ego. Your assessment of personnel was based on prejudice, not data. Your tactical decisions under pressure were reactive, emotional, and fundamentally flawed. You mistook my quietness for weakness, my gender for incompetence, and my lack of insignia for a lack of authority. She took a slow sip of her cold coffee. You challenged me to a test, she continued, her voice a soft, devastating whisper. A fight for professional survival. You just experienced that test. You failed. By your own definition, your career should, at this moment, cease to exist. Thorne could not speak. He could not move. He could only stand there, a monument to his own shattered hubris, and take the verbal evisceration. He had been weighed, measured, and found wanting on a scale he never knew existed. However, she said, placing the mug down, a court-martial would be inefficient. Your public humiliation is a matter of record, but it serves no lasting purpose. Education is a more effective tool than punishment. She looked past him, to the base captain who was still standing at a rigid position of attention. Captain, I will be filing the after-action report for this incident personally with Compsublant. I am formally requesting that Brigadier General Thorne be assigned as my temporary aide for the duration of this process. He will assist me in all data collection and analysis. He needs to understand in granular detail the mechanics of his failure. It was a stroke of genius, a punishment more profound and instructive than any official reprimand. He would not be broken and discarded. He would be forced into a position of direct, personal subordination to the woman he had tried to destroy. He would have to sit in a room with her for days, perhaps weeks, and watch her work, listen to her explain the complex science he had dismissed, and bear witness to the quiet, unassuming competence he had so grievously misjudged. He would be her student. He would learn respect through forced proximity and observation. It was not a punishment. It was a re-education. The story of what happened that night at FOB Thule passed into the annals of modern military lore. It became a fable, a teaching tool used at Annapolis and Quantico, a story told by grizzled master chiefs to cocky young ensigns. The details grew with each telling. The storm became a Category 5 hurricane. The ship became an aircraft carrier. The general was said to have burst into tears. But the core of the story, the essential truth of it, remained unchanged. It was a story about the vast difference between the appearance of strength and the reality of it. Years later, at the Naval War College, a guest lecturer stood before a hall of the military's best and brightest. He was an older man now, a retired Marine general named Marcus Thorne. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet, thoughtful gravity. He did not speak of grand strategies or famous battles. He told a story about a stormy night in the North Atlantic, a nameless woman in a corner, and the day his understanding of leadership was dismantled and rebuilt from the ground up. I was the hammer, he told the rapt audience, his voice thick with the memory of his own shame, and I believed every problem was a nail. I saw a woman I judged to be weak, and I tried to break her, but she wasn't a nail. She was the anvil, and the only thing that broke that day was my own foolish pride. He looked out at the young faces, the future admirals and generals of the nation. Your greatest weapon is not your rank, your bravado, or the firepower at your command. It is your humility. It is the ability to recognize competence in whatever form it appears, even if it is quiet, unassuming, and sitting alone in a corner. The most dangerous person in any room is not the loudest. It is the one who is listening, watching, and thinking. Never, ever, underestimate the quiet professional. He became one of the most respected instructors in the college's history, his own story of humiliation serving as his most powerful lesson. He had learned, through a baptism of fire and shame, the moral that Commander Evelyn Reed had taught him without ever raising her voice. For true strength is not a performance. It is not loud, nor is it boastful. It does not need to announce itself, for its presence is felt in its effects. True competence is a quiet, steady force, a bedrock of discipline and knowledge that reveals itself not in words, but in action, especially when the winds of chaos begin to howl. It is the calm voice that cuts through the panic, the steady hand that guides the ship through the storm. It is the substance that lies beneath the style, the reality that endures long after the hollow echoes of arrogance have faded. It is a lesson that institutions and individuals forget at their peril. Do not judge the sea by its calm surface, and do not judge the warrior by their quiet demeanor. For in the heart of the storm, it is not the thunder that saves you, but the unwavering light of the lighthouse, standing silent, steadfast, and utterly unshakably competent.